The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of First National Bank as Dr. Amelia Johnson carefully maneuvered her wheelchair through the automatic doors. She had been looking forward to this day for weeks. After months of planning and research, she was finally ready to expand her medical practice, and today's meeting would make it all possible. Amelia adjusted her navy blue blazer and checked her watch. She was 15 minutes early for her appointment with the loan officer, just the way she liked it. Being punctual had always been important to her, even more so since the accident 2 years ago that changed everything about how she moved through the world. The bank was busier than usual for a Tuesday morning. Lines of customers waited at the teller windows, and the seating area near the loan offices was nearly full. Amelia didn't mind the wait. She had learned patience the hard way during those long months of recovery and rehabilitation. She wheeled herself to the reception desk, where a young man with kind eyes looked up from his computer screen. "Good morning, how can I help you today?" "I have an appointment with Mr. Chen at 10:30, Amelia said, her voice warm and professional. "Dr. Amelia Johnson," the receptionist typed quickly on his keyboard. "Perfect, I see you here. Mr. Chen is just finishing up with another client. You're welcome to have a seat in the waiting area, and he'll be with you shortly." Amelia thanked him and made her way to an empty spot near the windows. She pulled out her tablet and began reviewing the documents she had prepared for the meeting. Everything was organized perfectly in digital folders. Her business plan, financial statements, projected growth charts, and letters of recommendation from other physicians in the community. 2 years ago, this moment had seemed impossible. The accident had happened on a rainy Thursday evening, as she was driving home from the hospital after a particularly long surgery. A drunk driver had run a red light and changed her life in an instant. The physical injuries were devastating, but the emotional impact had been even harder to bear. For months, she had wondered if she would ever practice medicine again. The rehabilitation process was grueling, and learning to navigate the world from a wheelchair felt overwhelming. But with time, determination, and the support of her family and colleagues, she had not only returned to work but had thrived in ways she never expected. Her practice had grown steadily over the past year. Patients appreciated her empathy and understanding in ways they hadn't before. Other medical professionals sought her consultation not just for her expertise, but for her unique perspective on patient care. She had discovered that her experience with disability had made her a better doctor, not a limited one. The expansion she was planning would allow her to hire 2 additional physicians and a nurse practitioner. They would be able to serve more patients and offer specialized services for people with disabilities. It was a dream that felt both ambitious and achievable. As she waited, Amelia noticed the usual mix of bank customers around her. There was an elderly gentleman reviewing his statements, a young mother trying to keep her toddler entertained, and several business people checking their phones impatiently. She had learned to observe people more carefully since the accident, partly out of necessity and partly out of a newfound appreciation for the small moments of human interaction. From across the room, she caught sight of a bank employee she didn't recognize. The woman appeared to be in her 40s with short brown hair and a stern expression. She was standing behind the customer service counter, but instead of helping the customer in front of her, she seemed to be staring in Amelia's direction. Amelia shifted slightly in her chair, wondering if perhaps the woman was looking at someone behind her. But when she glanced around, she realized she was the only person in that section of the waiting area. The woman's gaze felt uncomfortable, almost judgmental, but Amelia pushed the feeling aside. She was probably imagining things. She returned her attention to her tablet, scrolling through the financial projections one more time. The numbers looked good, better than good actually. Her practice had been profitable from the beginning, and the growth potential was substantial. She had saved aggressively for this expansion, and her credit score was excellent. There was no reason to think the loan application would be anything but straightforward. The bank employee was still watching her. This time, Amelia was certain. The woman had moved from behind the counter and was now standing near the loan officer area, her arms crossed, her expression decidedly unfriendly. Amelia tried to ignore her, but the feeling of being scrutinized was difficult to shake. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. Medical school had been challenging enough as a young black woman in a field still dominated by others. Building her practice had required persistence, skill, and no small amount of courage. The accident had added another layer of complexity, but it had also given her a deeper understanding of resilience. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her office manager. "Good luck today. We're all rooting for you." Amelia smiled and typed back a quick thank you. Her team had been incredibly supportive of the expansion plans, and several of them had even offered to take pay cuts if it would help with the initial costs. She was determined not to let them down. "Dr. Johnson," a pleasant voice interrupted her thoughts. A man in his 30s with a friendly smile was approaching her. "I'm David Chen. I'm so sorry to keep you waiting." Amelia saved her work on the tablet and smiled back. "No problem at all. I know how busy things can get." But as she began to wheel toward Mr. Chen's office, the stern-faced bank employee suddenly stepped into their path. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice sharp and authoritative. "I need to speak with this person before she goes any further." Mr. Chen looked confused. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Mitchell, but Dr. Johnson has a scheduled appointment with me." The woman, Mrs. Mitchell, didn't back down. "I don't care what kind of appointment she thinks she has. There are procedures to follow, and I have some questions that need to be answered first." Amelia felt her stomach tighten. Something about the woman's tone and the way she had said "this person" sent warning signals through her mind. She had heard that tone before, and it never led anywhere good. "I'm not sure I understand," Amelia said calmly, though her heart was beginning to race. "Is there some kind of problem with my appointment?" Mrs. Mitchell's eyes narrowed as she looked down at Amelia in her wheelchair. "Oh, I think there might be several problems, and we're going to sort them out right now in front of everyone so there's no confusion about what's really going on here." The waiting area had grown quiet. Other customers were beginning to turn their attention toward the unfolding scene. Amelia could feel the weight of their stares, and she knew that whatever was about to happen, it wasn't going to be the routine business meeting she had planned. She took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. Whatever Mrs. Mitchell thought she knew, Amelia was ready to handle it with the same grace and dignity that had carried her through every other challenge in her life. She had no idea that in the next few minutes her composure would be tested in ways she never could have imagined. Mrs. Mitchell stepped closer to Amelia, her voice carrying across the now silent bank lobby. "Before we go any further, I need to see some identification. All of it." Amelia blinked, caught off guard by the demand. "I'm sorry, but I've already checked in with the receptionist. My appointment is confirmed." "I don't care what the receptionist said," Mrs. Mitchell replied, her tone growing more aggressive. "I'm senior customer service, and I have the authority to verify anyone who walks through these doors, especially when something doesn't look right." Mr. Chen shifted uncomfortably beside them. "Mrs. Mitchell, I really don't think this is necessary. Dr. Johnson is an established client, and we have her appointment scheduled." Mrs. Mitchell shot him a sharp look. "Mr. Chen, I'll handle this. You can go back to your office." She turned back to Amelia, her expression cold and calculating. "Now I need to see your driver's license, social security card, and any other identification you have with you." The other bank customers were no longer pretending not to watch. Conversations had stopped, and all eyes were focused on the confrontation unfolding near the loan offices. Amelia felt heat rising in her cheeks, but she maintained her composure. "Of course," she said quietly, reaching for her purse. "Though I have to say, I've never been asked for this level of identification for a business meeting." "Well, that's because most people who come in here for business meetings actually belong here," Mrs. Mitchell said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "They don't roll in off the street expecting special treatment just because they're in a wheelchair." The words hit Amelia like a physical blow. She had faced discrimination before, but never so blatantly, never so publicly. She handed over her driver's license with hands that she willed to remain steady. Mrs. Mitchell examined the license with exaggerated suspicion, holding it up to the light as if checking for forgeries. "Dr. Amelia Johnson," she read aloud, making the title sound like an accusation. "And what exactly are you a doctor of? Because I find it very hard to believe that someone in your situation could afford the kind of services we offer here." "I'm a cardiologist," Amelia answered, her voice barely above a whisper. The humiliation was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Around her, she could hear people whispering to each other, phones being pulled out to record what was happening. "A cardiologist," Mrs. Mitchell repeated with obvious disbelief. "Right. And I suppose you expect us to believe you have the income to support a major business loan?" Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're probably here trying to take advantage of some kind of disability program. Mr. Chen took a step forward. Mrs. Mitchell, this is completely inappropriate. Dr. Johnson is here for a legitimate business meeting. Is she? Mrs. Mitchell challenged. Because I've seen this before. People come in here with sob stories and disabilities, thinking banks are required to give them money they can't pay back. It's fraud, plain and simple, and I won't let it happen on my watch. Amelia's hands were shaking now, but she forced herself to speak clearly. I can assure you that I'm here for a legitimate business loan. I have all the required documentation, and my financial situation is more than adequate for what I'm requesting. Mrs. Mitchell laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the lobby. Your financial situation? Lady, look at yourself. You're in a wheelchair, probably living on disability checks, and you think you can walk into our bank demanding business loans? This isn't a charity. The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. Amelia had endured months of physical therapy, rebuilt her entire life, and achieved more in the past 2 years than many people accomplished in a decade. But in this moment, sitting in her wheelchair while this woman publicly humiliated her, she felt smaller than she had since those first dark days after the accident. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Amelia said, trying one more time to reason with her. If you would just look at my account information, you'll see that I'm an established client with a strong banking relationship here. Oh, I'll look at your account information, Mrs. Mitchell said with a smirk. But first I want to know how someone like you even got an account here in the first place. Did you use fake documents? Did someone help you commit identity theft? Because I'm having a hard time believing any of this is legitimate. The accusation of fraud was the final straw. Amelia felt something inside her shift from embarrassment to anger. She had worked too hard and overcome too much to let this woman destroy her dignity in front of a room full of strangers. I've been banking here for 8 years, she said, her voice growing stronger. I opened my account when I finished my residency and started my practice. I have never had any issues with my accounts, and I have never given anyone reason to question my integrity. Mrs. Mitchell was undeterred. 8 years, really? Because I've been working here for 15 years, and I think I would remember someone like you. Maybe you're confused about which bank you actually use. Maybe you should try the credit union down the street. They're more accommodating to people in your situation. The suggestion was delivered with barely concealed contempt. Amelia realized that nothing she said was going to change this woman's mind. Mrs. Mitchell had decided who Amelia was the moment she saw her wheelchair, and no amount of reasoning was going to alter that judgment. Around them, the crowd was growing larger. Bank employees from other departments had emerged from their offices to see what was causing the commotion. Some looked horrified by what they were witnessing. Others seemed uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Ma'am, Mrs. Mitchell continued, her voice dripping with false concern. I understand that your disability might make things difficult for you, but you can't just come into a bank and expect special treatment. We have policies and procedures for a reason, and frankly, I don't think you meet the qualifications for the services you're requesting. Amelia looked around the room at the faces staring back at her. Some showed sympathy, others curiosity, and a few displayed the same kind of prejudice she was seeing from Mrs. Mitchell. She thought about her patients who would be counting on the expanded practice, her employees who were excited about growing the business, and her own dreams that were being trampled by this woman's ignorance and cruelty. She pulled out her phone and opened the voice recording app. If Mrs. Mitchell was determined to continue this public humiliation, Amelia was going to make sure there was a record of exactly what was being said. I would like to speak with the bank manager, Amelia said, her voice clear and steady despite the chaos of emotions churning inside her. Mrs. Mitchell crossed her arms. The manager is busy with important clients. Real clients. People who actually belong here. You can leave your contact information and maybe someone will get back to you. Someday. The dismissal was absolute and devastating. Amelia had never felt so powerless, so reduced to a stereotype, so completely dehumanized. But even as tears threatened to spill from her eyes, she held her head high. She had survived the accident, rebuilt her life, and created a successful practice. She would survive this too. What Mrs. Mitchell didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined in her rush to judge and humiliate, was that she had just made the biggest mistake of her career. The woman she was treating with such contempt wasn't just any bank customer. She was about to discover exactly who Dr. Amelia Johnson really was, and the revelation would change everything. The tension in the bank lobby was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mrs. Mitchell stood with her arms crossed, a satisfied smirk on her face as she watched Amelia struggle to maintain her composure. The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, with some people now openly recording the confrontation on their phones. "I'm going to ask one more time to speak with the manager," Amelia said, her voice steady despite the humiliation she was enduring. "This treatment is unacceptable and I want it documented properly." Mrs. Mitchell laughed again, that same harsh sound that had been echoing through the lobby. "You want documentation? Fine. I'll document that we had someone come in here trying to scam our bank, someone who thinks a wheelchair entitles them to special privileges they haven't earned. That's enough." The voice came from behind the crowd, crisp and authoritative. People began to part as a tall woman in an expensive suit made her way through the gathering. Her name tag identified her as Patricia Williams, branch manager. Mrs. Mitchell's expression shifted slightly, but she didn't back down. "Ms. Williams, I was just handling a situation with someone who doesn't seem to understand our policies." Patricia Williams looked from Mrs. Mitchell to Amelia, taking in the scene with sharp, intelligent eyes. "What exactly is the situation here?" "This woman," Mrs. Mitchell said, gesturing dismissively toward Amelia, "came in claiming to have an appointment for a business loan. She's been evasive about her identification and her ability to qualify for our services. I was simply following proper verification procedures." Ms. Williams turned to Amelia. "And you are?" "Dr. Amelia Johnson," Amelia replied, holding out her business card. "I have a 10:30 appointment with Mr. Chen to discuss expanding my medical practice." The bank manager took the card and studied it for a moment. Then she looked at Mrs. Mitchell with an expression that could freeze water. "Mrs. Mitchell, did you verify Dr. Johnson's account information before beginning this interrogation?" "I was about to get to that," Mrs. Mitchell said, but her confidence was starting to waver. "But given the circumstances, I felt it was important to establish proper identification first." Ms. Williams pulled out her phone and made a quick call. "I need someone to pull up the account information for Dr. Amelia Johnson immediately." She paused, listening. "Yes, that's Amelia Johnson. Full account details." While they waited, the lobby remained eerily quiet. Amelia could feel dozens of eyes on her, could hear the soft clicking of phone cameras capturing every moment. She thought about how this scene would look to people who didn't know her, how it would appear on social media, how it would affect her practice and her reputation. Ms. Williams' phone buzzed with a text message. She looked at the screen and her face went completely pale. She read the message again, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing, then looked up at Mrs. Mitchell with an expression of absolute horror. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said quietly, "Dr. Johnson's primary checking account has a current balance of $853,000. The number hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded." Mrs. Mitchell's mouth fell open, and several people in the crowd gasped audibly. The woman who had been accused of fraud, who had been told she didn't belong in the bank, who had been publicly humiliated for trying to get a business loan, was sitting on nearly $1 million. But Ms. Williams wasn't finished. She was still reading from her phone, her voice growing more strained with each word. "Her business account shows an annual revenue of $2.1 million. She's been a client for 8 years with a perfect payment history. She has 2 certificates of deposit totaling $400,000, and her credit score is 821. The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Mitchell's face had gone from pale to red to a sickly gray color. Around the lobby, people were beginning to whisper to each other, the shock evident in their voices. "Furthermore," Ms. Williams continued, her voice now carrying a tone of barely controlled fury, "Dr. Johnson is listed in our system as one of our premier elite clients, a designation reserved for our most valued customers." Amelia sat in her wheelchair, watching the realization dawn on everyone's faces. The woman they had watched being humiliated and degraded wasn't some scammer trying to take advantage of the system. She was one of the wealthiest, most successful clients the bank had. Mr. Chen, who had been standing frozen in shock throughout the entire confrontation, finally found his voice. "Dr. Johnson, I am so incredibly sorry. This should never have happened. Your appointment was confirmed, Your credentials were never in question, and Mrs. Mitchell had no authority to interfere with our meeting." Mrs. Mitchell looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. The confident, judgmental woman who had been so certain of her authority just minutes before was now facing the devastating reality of what she had done. She had publicly humiliated one of the bank's most important clients based on nothing more than her own prejudices and assumptions. I didn't know," Mrs. Mitchell stammered, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "You didn't know because you didn't bother to check," Ms. Williams said sharply. "You made assumptions based on what you saw, and you decided that someone in a wheelchair couldn't possibly be successful enough to deserve respectful treatment at our bank." Amelia finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear. "The most painful part of this isn't the money or the account balances. It's that for 15 minutes you made me feel like I wasn't worthy of basic human dignity. You made me doubt myself and my accomplishments because of your prejudices." The crowd was listening to every word. Several people were nodding in agreement, and she could see anger in many faces. Not anger at her, but anger at what they had witnessed. "You assume that because I use a wheelchair, I must be poor, desperate, and dishonest," Amelia continued. "You never asked about my education, my career, or my achievements. You saw my disability and decided that was all you needed to know about me." Mrs. Mitchell tried to speak again. "Dr. Johnson, I want to apologize. I made a mistake, and I'm truly sorry for any inconvenience." "Inconvenience?" Amelia's voice rose slightly. "You publicly accused me of fraud. You suggested I was trying to scam your bank. You told me I didn't belong here and should go to a credit union instead. You questioned my integrity, my intelligence, and my right to be treated with respect. That's not an inconvenience. That's discrimination." Ms. Williams was frantically typing on her phone, probably communicating with corporate headquarters about the crisis that was unfolding in her branch. Around the lobby, bank employees were looking at each other with expressions of shock and concern. Everyone understood that what they had witnessed was not just wrong. It was the kind of incident that could destroy careers and damage the bank's reputation permanently. "Dr. Johnson," Ms. Williams said, "I want you to know that this behavior does not represent the values of our institution. We will be conducting a full investigation into this incident, and there will be consequences." Amelia looked around the lobby at all the faces staring back at her. Some showed sympathy, others showed embarrassment at what they had witnessed. A few people were still recording on their phones, and she knew that within hours, this story would be spreading across social media. She thought about all the times she had faced doubt and discrimination throughout her career, all the times people had underestimated her because of her race or her disability. She had always handled those situations privately, professionally, with quiet dignity. But this was different. This was public, recorded and witnessed by dozens of people. Mrs. Mitchell's moment of cruelty had exposed something ugly that existed not just in her own heart, but in the systems and assumptions that allowed such treatment to happen. And now everyone could see it clearly. The truth was out, and there would be no taking it back. 6 months later, Amelia sat in her newly expanded medical practice, looking out the window at the bustling street below. The renovation had been completed ahead of schedule, and the additional physicians and nurse practitioners she had hired were already making a significant impact in the community. The business loan that had started all the trouble had been approved within days of the incident, with terms more favorable than she had originally requested. But the changes in her life went far beyond the expansion of her practice. The video of Mrs. Mitchell's discriminatory treatment had indeed gone viral, garnering millions of views and sparking nationwide conversations about disability discrimination in financial services. Major news networks had covered the story, and Amelia had found herself thrust into the role of an advocate for disability rights. The phone on her desk buzzed with a call from her assistant. "Dr. Johnson, you have a call from CNN. They want to interview you about the new federal guidelines for disability training in banks." Amelia smiled and shook her head. "Tell them I'll call back after my patient appointments are finished." She had learned to balance her medical practice with her unexpected role as a public advocate, but her patients always came first. The consequences for Mrs. Mitchell had been swift and severe. The bank's investigation had uncovered that her behavior toward Amelia wasn't an isolated incident. 3 other customers had filed complaints about her conduct over the years, complaints that had been inadequately addressed by management. The pattern of discrimination was clear, and it had cost her not only her job but her career in banking. Word of her termination and the reasons behind it had spread quickly through the financial services industry. When she applied for positions at other banks, the story followed her. Her LinkedIn profile had been flooded with negative comments. Local news stations had interviewed some of her previous customers who shared similar experiences. The woman who had been so confident in her authority and so cruel in her judgment had discovered how quickly a reputation could be destroyed. Amelia had mixed feelings about Mrs. Mitchell's fate. While she believed there should be consequences for discriminatory behavior, she also understood how devastating it must be to have one's entire career destroyed. She had declined multiple interview requests asking her to comment specifically on Mrs. Mitchell's unemployment, preferring to focus on systemic changes rather than personal retribution. The bank itself had undergone massive changes. The regional director who had arrived that day had implemented emergency training programs within a week. All employees were required to complete comprehensive courses on disability awareness, unconscious bias, and customer service standards. New policies were put in place requiring multiple approvals before any customer could be questioned about their account status or qualifications. More significantly, the bank had partnered with disability rights organizations to conduct regular audits of their practices and provide ongoing consultation on accessibility and inclusion. They had also established a scholarship fund for students with disabilities pursuing careers in business and finance. Ms. Williams had kept her job, but had been required to undergo additional management training. She had reached out to Amelia several times to apologize and to update her on the changes being implemented. Their relationship had evolved from the crisis response to something approaching mutual respect, though Amelia remained cautious about trusting institutions based on individual relationships. The story had attracted attention from federal regulators as well. The Department of Justice had launched an investigation into discriminatory practices at financial institutions, using Amelia's case as a catalyst for broader reform. New guidelines had been issued requiring banks to provide evidence of their disability inclusion training and to report any discrimination incidents to federal authorities. Amelia's phone buzzed with a text from her sister. "Saw you on the morning show today. Mom would be so proud." Their mother had passed away 3 years before the accident, but Amelia often thought about what she would have said about the situation. She would probably have been proud of how her daughter handled the discrimination, but she would have been heartbroken that it happened at all. The legal case had been settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. Amelia had donated a significant portion of the settlement to organizations working on disability rights and financial justice. Her attorney had wanted to push for a larger public trial, but Amelia had preferred to focus on making sure the incident led to meaningful change rather than prolonged litigation. One of the most unexpected outcomes had been the response from other customers who had witnessed the incident. Several had reached out to apologize for not intervening, and many had shared their own stories of witnessing or experiencing discrimination. A support group had formed, meeting monthly to discuss ways to be better allies and advocates for people with disabilities. The young receptionist who had been working that day, the one with kind eyes who had checked Amelia in for her appointment, had asked to meet with her privately. He had told her that Hatching what happened had changed his perspective on his role in speaking up against injustice. He had since become one of the bank's most vocal advocates for inclusion training, and had even started studying disability law in his spare time. Mr. Chen had also stayed in touch. He had been promoted to assistant branch manager, and had specifically requested to oversee the implementation of the new customer service policies. He often sent Amelia updates about the changes being made and asked for her input on proposed new procedures. The impact on Amelia's medical practice had been overwhelmingly positive. Patients from across the region sought her out, drawn not just by her medical expertise but by her advocacy work. She had become a symbol of resilience and dignity for many people with disabilities, and her patient load had grown substantially. She had also started speaking at medical conferences about the intersection of disability and healthcare, sharing insights about how her own experience had made her a more empathetic and effective physician. Medical schools had invited her to lecture about treating patients with disabilities with dignity and respect. The expansion of her practice had allowed her to hire Dr. Lisa Chang, a neurologist who specialized in treating patients with traumatic brain injuries, and Dr. Robert Kim, a physiatrist who focused on rehabilitation medicine. The nurse practitioner, Jennifer Torres, had extensive experience working with patients with mobility issues. Together, they had created a practice that was truly accessible and welcoming to people with all types of disabilities, but perhaps the most meaningful change had been the conversations the incident had sparked in her own community. Local businesses had begun reviewing their accessibility and inclusion practices. The City Council had passed new ordinances requiring businesses to provide disability awareness training to customer-facing employees. Schools had incorporated lessons about unconscious bias and respectful treatment of people with disabilities into their curricula. Amelia's phone rang again, and this time she recognized the number. It was a producer from a documentary film company that was creating a feature about discrimination in everyday settings. They wanted to include her story as part of a broader examination of how prejudice manifests in ordinary interactions. She accepted the call and listened to their proposal. The documentary would follow several individuals who had experienced discrimination in various settings: a restaurant, a store, a workplace, and her bank incident. The goal was to show how these experiences affected real people and to demonstrate the importance of institutional change. "I'm interested," Amelia told the producer, "but I want to make sure the focus is on education and change, not just on the drama of what happened. The goal should be to help people understand how they can do better, not just to shock them with stories of how badly some people behave." As she ended the call, Amelia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The woman who had attacked her that day in the bank had no idea that she was confronting someone who would refuse to be diminished by cruelty. Mrs. Mitchell had expected Amelia to shrink away, to accept the humiliation quietly, to disappear without making trouble. Instead, her moment of prejudice had sparked a movement. Her cruelty had been met with dignity. Her assumptions had been challenged by truth, and her discrimination had resulted in systemic change that would benefit countless people in the future. Amelia looked at the framed photo on her desk, a picture of her cutting the ribbon at the opening of her expanded practice, surrounded by her team, her family, and several of the bank customers who had become advocates for change. In the background, she could see the local news reporter who had first covered her story, and the disability rights attorney who had helped her navigate the legal process. It was a picture of triumph, but more than that, it was a picture of community. The incident that had started with one person's prejudice had ended, with dozens of people committed to creating a more inclusive and respectful world. Mrs. Mitchell had tried to shame her for being a black woman in a wheelchair who dared to believe she belonged in that bank. But Amelia had always belonged, in that bank, in her profession, in any space she chose to enter. The only person who hadn't belonged was someone whose heart was filled with hate and whose mind was closed to the possibility that people are more than what they appear to be. The truth had indeed ruined Mrs. Mitchell's career, but it had also elevated countless others and created changes that would outlast them all. And that, Amelia thought as she prepared for her next patient, was real justice.